And so, with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our final speaker of this incredible event, Enas Aref. Enas is a doctoral instructor and PhD candidate in industrial engineering at Western Michigan University, where she researches ergonomics, workplace safety, and well being. Oh, AI integration in education as well, and management leadership. She teaches courses in ergonomics, product design, and engineering management, integrating emerging technologies and hands on learning approaches into her instruction. She also serves as the AI Graduate Fellow at WMUX, where she develops and delivers workshops on technology enhanced learning and innovative pedagogy. In addition to her academic work, Enas has held leadership roles in industry, managing operations and cross-functional teams in international business settings. With a combined background in academia and industry, she applies a practical and research-informed approach to learning, development, and leadership training. She's passionate about supporting students, empowering educators, and advancing technology-driven, inclusive, and effective learning experiences. Enas, I don't think we've ever had anybody in TLDC that had a background like yours. It's so fascinating, and so I'm so glad that you're here participating at this event. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen, let you take over, and everybody, please welcome Enas to this conference.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me well? I am guessing it's a yes. Okay, so thank you so much for joining. And today we'll be talking about a topic that is not usually and commonly talked about, which is grief. And I do want to acknowledge that I really compliment your courage and your interest in such a topic that is very sensitive and sometimes uncomfortable to talk about. In our day-to-day life, in our professional life, we do not usually hear people talking about grief, right? It's not a topic that is commonly shared or talked about unless you are working in healthcare, in counseling, in well-being. You do not really see or hear people talk about grief. Yet it's a fact of life. I call it the thief that comes uninvited to your life and it messes with it. And you are expected to be back on your feet and do what you have to do with or without the needed support and help. In this presentation, I'll be talking about grief, some of the myths about grief, why and how it is not really addressed well at the workplace, and some suggestions on how to work on that. As Louis beautifully shared the bio, and I'm really thankful for that bio that you shared. I am not a grief researcher. Grief is not my area of study as an academic or as a professional. However, what informed my work on grief was the sudden death of my son exactly 22 months ago. When I was hit by grief, I had no clue what it was all about. And it was very hard, it was harsh to deal with. And as an academic, I thought, well, I need to know what is going on, what to expect. And I resorted to reading research because this is how I keep myself informed. And as I read about grief from research, I understood how difficult it is to deal with grief and how hard it is to live and exist after grief and how bad it can affect our lives. And I thought to myself, well, this is too much. I do not want to live the rest of my life this way. I reflected on my experience and I refound my purpose in life. And one of the reasons why I am presenting today is to raise awareness about grief and how we can, as organizations and as people and as humans, support those who are going through grief. So I'm coming from that background and that experience. I'm not going to talk more about my experience, but I will share what I have learned from research. And I will also share some of the work that I have done in research in collaborating with two amazing researchers from public health. After the loss of my son, I reached out to them and I said, well, there is a gap in research here, and we really need to address the challenges that women face, especially women in academia face when they go through bereavement. And that was what started my work in grief. And then in my presentation today, I'm going to show you some of that work, but we will talk more about not the academic setting, but at a workplace setting. So it could be any other workplace, does not necessarily have to be in academia. Again, just a disclaimer, I tried as much as I can to make the material, the words, and the content easy to join to and easy to listen to. However, I understand that it is possible that some of the content may be uncomfortable to some people, especially those who had recently lost a loved one, or it could trigger some memories and some unpleasant thoughts or emotions. So please feel free to take a breath, leave the session for now, and then come back. As Louis kindly said, it's going to be recorded, so you can always come back and listen. But I mean, please make sure to take care of yourself as you're joining this presentation, because the goal is for it to be informative, and it's not meant in any way to make anybody feel uncomfortable. With that said, let's start. So the overview of what we're going to be talking about is we're going to start by understanding grief in the workplace, the unseen struggles, and some of the shortcomings of the existing policies in how we go about addressing grief at the workplace, and then some ideas about how to move forward. And again, my goal is to raise awareness about grief and how we can handle grief in our workplace, whether or not we have a clear, structured policy about it. Because we do have policies, but those policies look great on paper. Sometimes they look great when we apply them. However, still people are struggling with grief. I am monitoring the chat, so if you have a question at any point in time, please feel free to drop it there. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So why this is very important? Because again, grief is under discussed at the workplace. You can walk into any meeting and you will see us talking about performance, about achieving goal, hitting the sales target, doing all those things. But you cannot, it's very rarely that you walk into a meeting and you hear people saying, well, today we're going to talk about grief because so and so have been through a devastating experience. When you train your employees, grief is not a thing that we train them on, not on how to handle it and not on how to respond to it when it occurs or it happens when a colleague or someone that we work with is going through grief. Women in leadership and women in any position, they do have a lot to carry, in addition to the challenges and the struggles that we go through in order to present ourselves well and secure the position for ourselves where we fit very well and very efficiently in. We also carry the burden of being mothers and being wives and being a daughter, and we have to care for our parents, our families, and carrying multiple roles at the same time is a struggle and a great trophy that we can all award ourselves. But adding grief to that is another layer of struggles that and challenges that women have to face. If you are a woman in a leadership role, then again, that is even maximized more, because in a leadership role, you are responsible to lead and to care for and to nurture your own people at work as well. And if you are a member of a team, again, there will be a lot of stereotyping that goes along with the fact that you're being a woman. Women, people of minorities, and everyone. But again, just for the theme of the conference, I'm focusing on women. However, the struggle about grief is the same. It's human in nature, and you cannot segregate between different people. Also, there is a clear and documented lack of structured support at the workplace, and that usually leads to isolation of the people struggling, and you can see how their performance deteriorate, and you'll see that there is a lot that is going on with them that is not as planned or as expected of them, and some of which could have been mitigated early on if we have a structured way to support them. Now, what is grief? According to the American Psychological Association, grief is defined as the anguish following significant loss, particularly the death of a beloved person, and manifests as a complex and deeply personal experience with emotional, cognitive, and behavioral responses. When somebody is grieving, we see out of them the tears, the isolation, the disconnection, but there is a lot that goes beyond that layer that we see that they show and communicate with us, right? And this is very important for us to know and to understand. Another term that is out there is bereavement, and people when they go through grief, the description of the reaction to the loss of someone is called bereavement. So you can get to see if you read the literature, the scientific literature or books on that, you get to see the two words being used. Very important to highlight that while when we talk about grief, it's just a grief due to the loss of a person, a loved one, a family member, a friend, but grief, the toll of grief, the how it affects us on the cognitive, behavioral, and emotional level, can also manifest due to other events of life. It could be a loss of a fairy friend. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a loss of intimacy. There are several other things that people go through that would affect their life, their behavior, their emotions, and their cognition in a way that grief would. Also, the type of loss affects how we grieve. So, if you are caring for a parent that is sick and you get to see it coming, it is different than a sudden death, like the one, for example, I experienced with my son. So, the type of death and how it happens also affects how we grieve and how we react to that instant. Here are some myths about grief, and those are very common, unfortunately. The first one is grief follows a predictable linear process. And the problem with that is that we set our expectation, whether we are the ones grieving or someone on our team is grieving, is that, well, grief starts very difficult, and then as we go with time, we're gonna be away, distance, they're gonna distance themselves away from grief, and eventually they're gonna be back to normal. Well, it does not work this way. When I returned back to work after the loss of my son, I think it was like 3 4 weeks after the loss, and I was lucky because when we lost him, it was in the summer, so I was not teaching. So when I went back to prep for my work, I went in as a grieving mother, and I will forever be a grieving mother, but I went in as Enas, the professional, the instructor that goes in to teach. So I was there showing with my regular self. So from the outside, I was the same old person. From the inside, I was not. I walked into the office of someone who had emailed me a couple of times to check on me, and I went in to thank them. And the first thing that they said was that they looked me from head to toe, and they said, "Well, you know what? You look like a strong woman. Let's turn the page, pretend nothing happens, and start not talk about it." And that was them. I took that with the best intentions in the world, and I know that they had all the good intentions, but their thought about grief was that, oh, she has already distanced herself from grief, she's recovering, let's lock her in that position and tell her not to go back again, as if that is a linear process and you're going to go away from grief. And we all have these misconceptions. However, that is not true, and this is not how grief works. When we grieve, we are expected to be back to normal. However, there is no going back to normal. There is a new normal that is created as we heal and as we figure out the purpose of our lives, and as we get back to living a life that is close to normal. We change, how we perceive life change, how we work changes and everything around us changes. So one of the misconception or myth about grief is that people will come back to normal. We expect them to, they're going to go for 3 days, they go a week, a month, or whatever, and then when they get back, they're going to operate the same exact way. This does not work. You should move on and quickly. In a professional setting, we do not really give people enough time to grieve, right? And we're expecting them to come back to work quickly and to move on, as if, again, as the comment that I heard, turn the page and just keep going. Expressing grief is a sign of weakness, and we will talk more about this. And I remember a couple of days there was a session about creating psychological safety at your within your team and at the workplace. So no human emotion is a sign of weakness, and we need to work a lot to build trust and vulnerability and safety within our teams in order to go about that. So again, another misconception is grief is a sign of weakness. It's not. Not showing signs of grief means that you are over it and you're fine. Again, that is not true, because it hits hard and it changes us, and we're no longer the same person. Now, I see myself, or when I talk about myself, I say that I am a grieving mother and forever I will be. However, I chose not to let grief define me, and I chose to break all the stereotypes about grief and women who are grieving and mothers who are grieving. Staying busy will help you get over it. Again, it's a misconception. Some people resort to being busy to get over it. However, that does not really treat or cure the main cause of the problem. It's just like it's treating the symptoms. It's just keeping yourself busy so that you would not think about the loss. And that is not the right way to go about it. And when we have people coming back to work after going through grief, we need to make sure that we're not just keeping them busy so that they get distracted. There is a right and wrong way to grieve. And this is, again, one of the things that I did not like at all personally. And when I reflect on it and I see it from research erupting, it's a big problem when people are told how to grieve and how they should feel, and if they should cry or they should not cry, if they should do this or not do that. This is not the right way to go about grief. And as from the definition of grief, we understood that it affects people cognitively and emotionally and physically. So it's not just the emotional pain. It's not that those few tears that we drop and now the tears have dried, so grief is gone. It affects people way beyond that. Grieving is a unique experience. The fact that I am a grieving mother does not mean that I will understand people's experience of grief. However, I understand that there is a void that needs to be filled. And as institutions or as working with our teams, there is a lot of support and a lot of resources that need to be mobilized to support that person. However, the way that someone needs support as they grieve may be completely different than how I needed support when I was grieving. The last one is the one that hit me the most, and it was one of the reasons why I went to research and started to read about grief. Only immediate family members grieve significantly, and only immediate family members are the ones that are going to support you through grief. So I received tons of texts and cards and emails, and at the bottom of each of those was a very it is a thoughtful word that we use a lot. However, I'm going to share with you how it sat with me. The sentence was, I hope you're getting enough support from your family and friends. The minute we say that, it's as if we are telling the person, good luck with your grief. Have your family and friends help you. And I am not taking part of it. I am distancing myself completely out of it. Imagine saying this to one of your team members or to someone that you're managing or to a colleague. What if they do not have family left? What if that person that passed away was the only family they had? What if the person that passed away was their friend? There are tons of what ifs that would go with that. So when we approach grief with a lot of consideration, sometimes we're so scared to be so in offering help, and we try to approach it slowly. But sometimes, again, what we say and how we approach it is not the right way. And it makes the people feel, those who are grieving, more isolated and more disconnected. Some facts about grief: it is a unique experience. There are two types of grief: normal grief and complicated grief. Normal grief is what we experience at the very beginning, and then eventually, with time, we try to figure out our new normal and hopefully and possibly finding a new purpose in life. Complicated grief, when things continue to get worse and up to 6 months, and that's coming from research. However, I believe it's again going to be different from one person to another. But complicated grief happens when things really get worse and the person is unable to live a very normal basic life. Like they are neglecting their own hygiene, they are not communicating back, they are isolating themselves completely, they are disconnected completely from life. This is where they need to have a healthcare provider or go gets counseling service to them, because they do need help beyond what we can do. And it's very, very important, again, as we talk about grief in the workplace, that we differentiate between our efforts to help the person to reintegrate themselves as a functional member of a team or of an organization, and their need to have that help from a healthcare provider to help them understand what is going on with them and figuring out ways for them to reintegrate themselves back into life. Right? So we need to be clear about our role. So with everything that I am going to share, I'm going to share our role as managers or leaders. But we need to be mindful that further help might be needed to be offered to the person. We can help as much as what we can offer within the work environment. Grief can affect us on a short term and long term, right? So short term, you see what you see. So the tears, the discomfort, the lack of sleep, all those things, the thoughts and the struggle. Long term, it has different effects. For example, I taught a class on product design and how to integrate ergonomics in product design so that we can create products that accommodate the majority of the people. And one of the examples that I used over and over and over again was the design of a stretcher, and how the medical stretcher has to be designed to accommodate people of all sizes to fit on it. And that was one of my favorite examples that I taught and used for so many years. Right after the death of my son, I could not go over that example. And I was lucky that I had a co-instructor, like a lead instructor, and I was his co-instructor. He took charge of it, and he went over that example. And as that example was being explained to students, I could not stop my tears, and I found myself crying in the classroom. After that session was over, we had a break, and when we reconvened and it was my turn to take over the course, the class session, I did share with my students that I'm very sorry that if you saw me cry, I'm very sorry. That example was a little bit traumatizing for me. It brought a lot of thoughts and emotions because I have been through an experience that is quite devastating. So I'm very sorry for that. If you have questions, you can direct them to the lead instructor or to myself, and we took it from there. So I would have never thought that an example, an image of a stretcher would have made me feel like that. So grief does have a lot, it affects us in so many ways, and we cannot even predict how it would affect us. The one thing that I want to highlight from that experience as well was that I was very true, honest, and vulnerable with my students, and I shared about that. I did not go through unnecessary details, but I did acknowledge that I am a human. I have my own experiences, and I can cry, but I can also bounce back and go back to what I can do and love to do. And things like that would create that environment that we're looking for to support other people. And When you have that communication with your team or within your team, so with your team, if you're a leader, within your team, if you're a member, or again, leading the team, you can show that you as a leader, you can be vulnerable and that's okay. You can trust them and they can trust you, and you open that channel of communication in order to make things better for everybody. Grief can manifest in physical health problems like fatigue and sleep problems. From research, some research suggests that men and women react to grief differently, and they have different patterns of grief. However, sudden death of children is the worst type of grief. And they had done research on mothers who are grieving after the loss of their child. And they found out that their brain is rewired differently, and their capacity to think clearly and to make proper decisions is impaired. And that was, again, one of the reasons that I reflected on my experience. And I said, well, if my son was around, he would not want to see me deteriorate, not being able to think and not being able to perform. And I found my purpose in that way. But the fact that I was educating myself or finding resources to be educated from, that helped me shape how I want to handle my own grief. Again, the support that we get from family and friends. Sometimes we get the support that we need, sometimes we don't. Cultures differ a lot in how people deal with grief, so we need to be mindful of that. While we expect family and friends to support those who are grieving, sometimes that support is not there, and sometimes they need more than that. Now, with AI everywhere, there are chatbots that sometimes people use to cope with grief. I have not tried those, so I cannot really give recommendations there, whether I'm pro or against, but those two exist. Do we have any questions so far? Oops. Okay. So because I uploaded the slides there, that should have moved in. But let me show you what is that. There is one of the grief models that are very popular, which is the Kubler-Ross grief model. And that walks through 5 different stages of grief, starting from your denial, you're angry, and then takes you time until you accept that. And when we look at that model, and I'm sorry that it's not showing here, you get to see that it looks as if it's phases, and you're exiting one phase to enter the other. Grief you have received in the workplace, and how did I will get to your question, Laura, soon, and when I talk about how we do that in the organization. But thank you for asking that question. So the grief models that are out there, especially the Kubler-Ross, while it's valid and a lot of people have been using it, and I think it was created in the 60s, it looks at grief as if it's phases. You're exiting one phase and going to another, and that is not the real thing. The real thing is what you see out here on the screen right now. You move from anger to denial to acceptance to bargaining to depression, all at the same moment, on the same day. It's not you're done with denial and you went to anger, and then once you ended anger, you went to bargaining. It doesn't work this way. So again, we should not be making assumptions about people who are grieving and how they are handling that. This is coming from the book Option B by Sandberg and Grant. The author, one of the co-authors is Adam Grant, the organization psychologist, and the lead author was one of the executive board at Facebook, I think maybe 10 years ago. And she had lost her husband, and she was going back to work, leading her team and the organization. And she just documented the whole experience. It's a good book to read. It will inform you about some of the struggles that happen. But again, this is coming from there. And sometimes there are certain things that people go through that hinders them from actually recovering. So the first thing is personalization. When you believe that you're to blame for what happened, you could have spent more time. You could have taken good care of them more. You could have done this, done that. And that does not help. So that sentiment of we're regretting doesn't really help. And then the pervasiveness, to believe that the events affects all areas of your life, that you're grieving and your whole life is falling apart and you cannot put your life together again. Sometimes people come to the workplace after an event like that, and they come with all those thoughts that the effect of grief is going to last forever. They are not capable of doing their job now, which means that they're not. They believe that it's not going to work in the future as well. So we need to educate ourselves about those things to better prepare to help the people that if and when they go through grief. How does grief impact performance? Decision making, reduced focus, mental clarity, fatigue, decision fatigue, lack of sleep would affect how the brain works, right? And then they may avoid to take high stakes choices. They do not have that emotional intelligence that they had. Few things could trigger them. Unexpected things, in fact, could trigger them. Sometimes they have impaired short term memory. So, those are things that have been found from research. So, we know that this is true. However, this does not mean that the person is inefficient. It's just a phase, right? And we need to figure out ways to help them with that. And we're going to talk about this shortly. On their well being and health, they have insomnia, fatigue, chronic stress, depression. And there is grief is not depression. However, they do correlate and they happen together. But a person could be grieving. They do not necessarily mean that they are depressed. And some people just mix the two. But again, due to that toll on the physical, emotional, and cognitive load that they had, burnout could possibly happen. They may lose motivation to go back to work or to do whatever they need to do. They may present with emotional disconnection to work. They're there, they're not motivated, they do not want to do the work, and there is a lot that is going on through with them. On a leadership level, your role is different. So if someone in leadership position that is going through grief, it's going to be even harder. You have challenges because not only you have to be motivated, but you have to motivate others as well. So imagine that if you yourself, you're losing that clarity of mind, you cannot make decisions, you do not have motivation. How can you be able to do your job? So sometimes people withdraw completely. They overcompensate by other stuff. They tend to delegate more to people that are not really prepared to be delegated to. They isolate themselves. They have guilt over reduced productivity, and that gets them into a vicious cycle that they cannot get out from. What is available right now when it gets to policies and programs that are there? Every organization has its policy, and I'm talking here about the US, but if and some of the policies here are also address what happens in Canada, but every single country in every single place in the world has some policies to help people who go through grief. However, those policies are not really the best. So, for example, here, the Fair Labor Standards Act does not require payment for time not worked, including attending a funeral. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management indicated that an employee is entitled to use sick leave to make arrangement necessary by the death of a family member. The paid funeral leave is 3 days, and these benefits may not be provided to everyone that works. So this is offered to full-time workers, but if they're part-time workers, that may not be the case for them. Organizations do offer an employee assistance program, right? And it's part of what they have to offer, and this is there to help employees with their behavior and mental health issues. However, does not necessarily have to be effective, and people does not necessarily have to use it. And even if they use it, that's going to tackle that part of them dealing with life, but it may not really address their performance on the job. And sadly, those programs are assessed based on cost benefit analysis model, not how effective and how helpful they were to get people back on track and to help them reacclimate to the work environment and be productive again, or refinding their purpose at work and being productive again. OSHA did report on workplace stress, and it emphasized that emotional load, including grief, is unique to the individual. However, the policies that are out there are one size fits all, right? And that may not be the case. And again, those policies, they're out there, but they lack flexibility. And as we have established, grief is a very unique experience. So you cannot expect that one solution or one set of helpful strategies are going to help everybody on your team. You have to build that flexibility into your policies, and it has to be structured to be centered to the employees. There are some challenges that people go through, like the lack of cultural awareness within your team or within your organization. Some people with some minorities may not be able to get certain help that they need. There are also financial barriers that people may be going through. The one key thing that I want to highlight in this slide is the lack of cultural awareness, because right now we have people, our teams are composed of people coming from all backgrounds and in cultures. So the cultural awareness is very important. And the key thing that I would highlight here is that if we can recognize that there are differences, and then period, we know differences, so we're not going to do anything, but we can go the extra step and approach the people and ask them, how can we help? What do you want us to do? What is acceptable? What's not acceptable? This is better approach than there are differences and we're acknowledging the differences. This is why we're distancing ourselves from offering any help. To rephrase, the key things that we want to focus on at the moment is that one size does not fit all, but this is what we have right now as policies. There are no formal reintegration process when people go through grief and then get back to work. We do not have a clear process on how to reintegrate them there. There is lack of grief literacy in HR and management. And then we do not really offer specific accommodations for people to come back or to be reintegrated when they get back. So people need time and flexibility, compassion, and then they need meaningful workload that they can handle. And then they need validation and psychological safety. So what we can do, and I'm going to address your question, Laura, in this section. So we want to make a case that supporting people who grieve is very important because there are consequences to unaddressed grief in the workplace. You will see people disengaged. They could possibly get injured if they're working on a shop floor, operating machinery or using equipment. Their performance is going to degrade. So not addressing grief is going to negatively affect the organization or the team or the group of people that get to work together. There is a return on investment when we invest in people's well-being. And this does not necessarily mean just those programs that we tell them, well, call this number, you're going to get counseling service for free. And when we provide that support, we can promote our talent retention, and we can also attract more talents to our organization because we do support our people no matter what. Communicate boundaries and capacities. As a leader going through grief, it is different because you are expected to be the one to support your people. Now the position is different. So you want to be clear about the boundaries, what you're accepting, what you're not accepting, what you need, and what you can do, right? You want to revisit the goals and timelines and make sure that those are adjusted and be true about your own capacity. And focus on clarity, not control. So if you can delegate, please do that because you want to make sure that the work gets done and you're achieving the goals that you want to achieve. And then practice self-compassion. Remember when we talked about that, the fact that when people go through grief, they get into the cycle of the performance is degrading, and then they get into that self-guilt. You want to practice self-compassion and understand that this is a phase you need help to get by. Once you do, you can possibly be back to your normal performance. Building resilience is a skill, not a trait. The fact that we can be resilient is something that we can learn, and we can be supported to learn. So start by having that empathy towards yourself and be kind to yourself, and then seek help in order to be able to bounce back and to be as productive as possible as you were. And again, there will be a new normal, and you need to have patience with yourself to go back to being normal. But when we think about resilience, it's not I have it or I do not have it. It's something that you can train yourself and get help in order to be sure that you are resilient with yourself. Also, it's something that you can build within your community and your team, and you help them achieve that element of, as a team, we're going to be resilient and we're going to provide support as needed and help as needed. Leadership with empathy. Regardless of your leadership style, you can lead in whichever way you want. Unless you are people centered and people focused, you cannot really support those who are grieving. So empathy is very, very, very important there, right? So empathy is like, I feel for you, I understand the pain, I'm ready to help. There is an empathy gap when we talk about women and how they're perceived at the workplace as opposed to men. So for example, when I went back to work, I was perceived differently had, God forbid, been somebody else, a colleague of mine, for example, that had been through something like that. So there are a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes that go with women, and that would get us into that empathy gap as well. Um, you want to build that grief-informed leadership into your practice, and to do that, you need to have empathy, you need to have resilience, and also you want to make sure that your team, when something like that happens, you get together and you work collectively in finding ways that you can support the person who is grieving. You want to create psychological safety. And again, there was a great session a couple of days ago on psychological safety or safety at the workplace. You need to build that psychological safety at your workplace. And you need to make sure that people are comfortable sharing. Maybe, I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip through this, and I want to get to this. So this is the 5 dysfunctions of teams. And this is the model that was created by Patrick Lencioni. And the one at the bottom there is the absence of trust. So within your team, if you do not have trust, the performance of the team is going to degrade. They're not going to go well, and you will get to see a lot of conflicts and a lot of low performers on your team. Very important to build trust. And by trust, we mean that if I share something about myself within the team, I trust that they are not going to take that against me. Whether it's a mistake that I did, a failure, a knowledge gap that I have, whatever it is, I know that I can share with them and they can support me. So imagine that somebody's going through grief and they walk into a team that lacks trust. They will not be able to perform at all. They do not know what to share and how to ask for help even. So very important in our teams that we build trust and we build that psychological safety. Because when things happen, like grief or a crisis or whatever happens, we will be already together as a team. We know how to communicate and we know how to support each other. Right? So very important to do that. And let's jump back to we need to understand that people, when they're going through pain, they cannot really perform, and everyone has certain capacity to adapt to what is going on within the team. You want to build that structure that people can come and talk about what they can do, what they cannot do. And maybe let me jump to yep, let's start here. So when someone goes through grief, you want to start by doing the one-on-one meeting with them, right? Ask them what they need. Most of the time they do not know what they need. So maybe you can start by looking at their workload and discussing it with them, looking at what they can delegate, what they could be struggling with what additional resources that you can provide to them, if they need someone to help them or if they need someone to mentor them through the process. When someone at the workplace gets injured with a musculoskeletal disorder, something like carpal tunnel syndrome, for example, after they return to work, sometimes we have to give them a different job, and we call that a job transfer. And that could be forever, and that could be for a short period of time. That too applies to situations like that. Maybe that person right now is not capable of fully doing their own job the way they did. Maybe they can do something else. And then once they are ready, they can gradually be reintegrated in their work. Make sure to offer continuous, ongoing check ins with them. And you want to make sure that you have that clear, honest, and vulnerable channel of communication with them so that they can share about what is really struggling them. So that's for the person that is has been struggling from grief and coming back. For your team, you need to work together to figure out ways to reorganize the workload, figure out ways to provide more resources for that person to be integrated, figure out ways to handle team dynamics and conflict resolution within the team so that person, when they come back, they do not struggle again. When I went back to work, some people did not talk to me at all. And some people were very willing to talk about it and discuss it. While, and again, Laura, to your question, the most positive response to grief that I had from my organization or my workplace that helped me was the flexibility. I was let to do what I felt I can do. I wanted to go back to work, and I was like, okay, come back to work. I was not feeling okay. That was okay. Take the day off. I was being asked about the workload that I was assigned to. Is this too much? Is this a lot? Are you the check-ins with my manager of, are you taking care of yourself? How are you doing? How is your family doing? Do you need help? Those were the things that were really, really helpful. So the goal of my talk, as I'm wrapping up here, is we need to educate ourselves about grief, and we need to have the courage to address it within our teams and with when people struggle with grief. Maybe we need to revisit again our policies and see if they are good enough for our people. And if our teams are built with that element of psychological safety and trust, maybe even when the policies are not 100% supporting the needs of the people in our organization, our small individual teams can, within itself, they can support the people within the team. Um, we need to be creative in figuring out ways for people to reintegrate one more time at the workplace, figuring out ways to retrain them, and also ways to make sure that they are back on track. Finding their purpose might be one of the things that we can help with, but at the workplace alone, we cannot do that. I found my purpose when I took the time to educate myself about grief, reflect on my experience, and see what I can do, what I cannot do, and that helped me figure out my purpose. But people will need to refigure their purpose, and those who appreciate their professional life a lot, the fact that they cannot perform as they used to be will be devastating for them. And we need to be careful about that. So those people may need more help and more reorientation into what they do, what they can do, and how to provide them with help. And I mean, with that, I would like to stop sharing here and get the questions if you have any questions.
Enas, thank you so much for the session and for sharing with us. Was it helpful for you to be able to discuss this, to share this
Yes,
presentation?
yes, because I really want to raise awareness about grief because when I went through what I went through, everyone expected that my life ended. The fact that 3 weeks later I showed up to work ready to perform, that left some people speechless. And that is okay because again, people, they create their own scenarios and then you walk in and you can prove that those scenarios were wrong or you can adhere to those. So I want to raise awareness about grief, and I want to raise awareness about especially women and mothers who are grieving,
Mhm.
because that's one of the worst experience anyone can go through.
Yeah,
And if I can be that person that they can look at or watch this presentation and say, well, here's somebody who was broken into pieces, but she somehow figured out ways, or she was supported enough to figure out ways to put herself back together and continue to live. I would love to be that one, or among those people that can show that we can be grieving, but we can continue to live.
yeah. Um, I want to ask you a few questions. I
Yes,
think
go ahead.
that, yeah, I have to. I want to give you some context though, with because this is probably hitting a lot closer than I expected. But last week, I found out from my mom that she's terminally ill and that she has well, the doctor said she has 6 weeks to live. And so there's this sort of unbelieving, this thing that I'm sort of going through a little bit of denial and not sure how to proceed. I'm really close to my mom. And so she lives, like 300 miles away, but probably after this event, I'm probably going to go down there. But what were the kinds of conversations that you were having with yourself when you were going through this? As somebody that it seems like you achieve a lot, you must be really, really busy. But what was the dialogue like internally for you?
The day after the funeral, I was sitting in my spot on the couch looking at the door of my son's room, and I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? And I had all the scenarios that you could ever think of. And then something in my head said, well, what would he have done? Let's switch places. Had you
Mm.
been the one, the gun, he was the one that stayed. And I went through the day as if he was here, that he would wake up early, he would make sure that his father and sister are okay, he would go to his jiu-jitsu practice, and then he would go to work, and he would do this, that, and then he would make sure that everybody's okay, done his schedule. He was very disciplined. I call him a walking example of discipline. And then after he was done with everything, he might have curled in his bed and cried over me. But I saw him right in front of me doing all of that, and I was like, well, if this is how I see him, that he would be that responsible, that disciplined, and that focused on making sure that everybody is okay, and he would continue to go on with his dreams, then I owe it to him, to his legacy, to who he was, that at least I follow that model that he would have done, like to follow his lead. And that was the thing that put me back on my feet, and somehow brought me back to sanity. The second thing was, he was 17 years old, so he had not graduated high school. He passed away the first day of summer vacation after his junior year. So I will never see him graduate. And I said, I am blessed that I can teach, and I love teaching so much, but right now I walk into a classroom looking at each one of my students and saying, I'm going to invest my all in them to make sure that each one of them graduates. I will never see my son graduate, but I can put in my all in all of those kids and students and see them graduate.
Yeah,
So you have to find your own purpose, and it is not easy. It is not at all. But what I am sure of is that those who leave us, they do not want us to be sad. They do not want us to be, they do not want our lives to stop. They want us to continue. And if you restructure, and at least this is how I've done, I restructured my life around him, that I am doing all of this for him. I am honoring his legacy and I'm doing this for him. So, and again, my experience may not be the case for everybody, but
Right.
when we grieve, we need to have a purpose to relive. And that purpose is going to shape how we come to a new normal. And
Hmm.
we need to be okay with that new normal.
Hmm. I have kind of, I guess, sort of more of a pragmatic question. If you're working remotely, I mean, it sounds like you must work face to face with other folks in an office, but working remotely, do you see any differences in managing, like within a team, how that would affect that?
I okay. How do we communicate in virtual teams? We do communicate, right? There are tons of ways that we can communicate and we can share. So
Yeah.
I do not really see a barrier towards integrating people and supporting them when they go through grief, even though we are remotely located. We can possibly be in different countries, thousands of
Right.
miles away. It's the intention and the approach, and then
Hmm.
figuring out how we can use the resources that are available to support them. That's
Yeah.
the thing. So you can reach out to them via email, via text, via whatever. The
Yeah.
key is, what is the content of the message? Are you telling them, I hope you're being taken care of, family and friends are taking good care of you? Or you're telling them, I'm 1,000 miles away. I know how it hits hard. I'm here to help. Whenever you're ready, let's schedule a meeting just to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Right.
And you take it from there.
Okay.
So I really do not see that being remotely located or working on virtual teams is a problem, in my
Hmm.
opinion, my experience as well.
Cool. No, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you, Enos.
Yes.
Yeah. Any questions out there? I'm just taking a look. I haven't seen much. I know that we've kind of consistently had the same audience in, so wanted to hear for any feedback or any questions or anything like that. If not, I can wrap things up. Enos, I want to just thank you for sharing this topic. It's helped me hearing you talk about this. And it's actually probably prepared me in a way that I wouldn't have been prepared before. So um, I really, really thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions pop up. I want to just thank everybody for being here. And don't forget, I'm going to be posting these as recordings on the tldc.com website. You'll also see more of that, more in the emails if you're a subscriber to the TLDC newsletter. All right, there you go. Sylvia says it's a needed conversation in the workplace, and Laura, thank you. She says thank you for sharing your story. Enas, thank you for sharing your story and these helpful sites, and I appreciate that, Laura,
Of
for
course.
uh, for the comment.
Yep.
All right. And with that, everybody, I'm going to close everything out. One more thing that I do want to mention, and this is way off, but my personal LinkedIn profile got hacked, and then also the page that I created for TLDC was also removed by whoever got into my account. I had a really complicated password too, so I don't know how exactly it happened. But anyway, if you do see my account or TLDC share anything, if you could just, I don't know, follow the page or do any of that, because that's how I communicate these events on LinkedIn. I just won't really be able to do that as well as until I start building things up again. Otherwise, if you go to the tldchat.us, which is tldchat.us, that's our Slack group. I always post promotional info in there as well as the newsletter. You'll get information about events. And the next event that I plan on producing for next month is an immersive learning conference. So I'll be sending out proposals for that. If you're interested in that one, keep an eye out for that for that event coming up. All right. Well, Enas, thank you again so much. Thanks everybody for being a part of this community and this event. I'll go ahead and close it out. I hope you enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.